friends. Bill Monty here, and welcome to Bill Monty's Guide for Getting Older. If you are a returning listener, thank you so much for your support. And if you're brand new here, I just want to explain that this show isn't just about getting older. It's about understanding the world we're growing older in, how we care for each other, how we protect what we've built, and how we make sense of the systems that are supposed to look out for us, especially when we need them the most. Point in fact, several weeks ago, I said that I would be talking about Medicaid, Medicare, and a man named Peter David. A few weeks have gone by. Some other things came up with my other podcast, Tales from South Florida, that had to get taken care of. But I am here, and we are going to talk about this today. Longtime listeners know this is not the first time that I've talked about Medicare and Medicaid. And for those who maybe have just come on board in the last 8 or 9 episodes, this one's going to have a little bit of a different tone. Because, frankly, my friends, when I talk about this subject, even though I might close every episode with saying be kind, these are times that I think maybe get angry is more appropriate. Because today's story is about one of the great creative voices in American pop culture. He was a writer of comic books and author of novels, screenplays. His name was Peter David. And you might not know his name right away, but if you've ever cracked open an issue of The Incredible Hulk, Spider-Man 2099, or X-Factor, or Supergirl, he gave superheroes depth, emotional, psychological, human depth. But Peter David's story in his later years also shines a light on something that affects millions of older Americans: the complicated, sometimes heartbreaking world of health coverage, specifically, as I said before, Medicare and Medicaid. So in today's episode, we're going to talk about both the man, his remarkable creative life, and the system that failed him when he needed it the most. Peter David was born in 1956 in New Jersey. From an early age, he had a storytelling spark. He started out as a fan, as many of us did, a kid who loved comic books, and eventually he worked his way into the editorial offices of the Marvel Comics company. In the late 1980s, he got his big break when he began writing The Incredible Hulk. And this wasn't your typical smash and bash version of the Hulk that we know from the cartoons or whatever. David took the Green Giant, not the green bean one, but the Hulk Green Giant, and turned him into a character with many layers, exploring Bruce Banner's childhood trauma, his fractured personality, the sadness behind the strength. His 12-year run is still considered one of the most important in Marvel history. And to kind of give you an example, if you didn't know, if you followed the movies that were created by Marvel, that version of the Hulk is the one that Peter David created, even up into the Smart Hulk that showed up in the last movies. He also reinvented Aquaman for DC Comics. He created Spider-Man 2099, a futuristic Spidey with the blue suit. He breathed life into X-Factor, a spinoff of the X-Men comic books. And when he wasn't writing comics, he was turning out Star Trek novels, screenplays, video game stories, even some sitcom scripts. If you were a comic book fan or a science fiction fan growing up in the 80s and 90s, or let's be honest, if you're still one today, you probably read something by Peter David. But behind that creativity, behind the panels and pages, was a man who faced some serious health challenges later in life. Peter suffered his first major stroke in 2012. He recovered, but his health continued to decline over the years. There were more strokes, there was kidney failure, heart problems. His wife often shared updates online. His fans rallied to support him. By 2022, his hospital stays were becoming more frequent, and by 2025, he was on a ventilator, and he was fighting for his life. And this is where his story takes a turn that many Americans, especially those of us who are growing older, will find familiar and infuriating. Peter David lost his Medicaid coverage. After years of chronic illness and medical expenses, his family suddenly found themselves without the safety net they thought that they could rely on. Friends launched a GoFundMe campaign just to cover the mounting hospital bills. When he passed away in May of 2025 at just 68 years old, his family was still dealing with medical debt. Now, it's important to say this clearly. We don't know that losing Medicaid directly caused his death. His health problems were severe and long-standing. But what is clear is that losing that coverage made his final months far harder than they should have been. And that brings us to the bigger question of this episode. Why is it that in the richest nation on earth, someone who gave so much to American culture cannot afford to be sick? Why is it that in the greatest nation on earth, people lose their houses, their livelihoods, the money they have saved their entire years, just because they got sick? This is not the way it should be working, my friends. We're the only civilized nation on the planet that this happens on. Other countries, other cultures, if you get cancer, it doesn't mean just maybe a death sentence for you. It also doesn't mean a death sentence for living, a way of life, where you might become homeless, where you can lose everything you have. And to understand all of this, we have to rewind. We have to go back to the origins of Medicare and Medicaid themselves. So let's set the stage here. It's the mid-1960s. Lyndon B. Johnson is in the White House, and America is in the middle of the Great Society era, a time when the federal government took on big ideas to fight poverty and improve lives. Sounds promising, right? Before 1965, you have to understand, older Americans had almost no health coverage. If you were retired, you were often uninsured. Hospitals sometimes demanded payment up front. Many seniors lived in poverty because of medical bills. So in 1965, Lyndon Johnson signed Medicare and Medicaid into law, two programs that would reshape American health care. Let me just stop you for a second. Lyndon Johnson sometimes gets a rap as not being a great president because of Vietnam, a situation that he inherited and, granted, he himself would have said did not make better. But also while in power, he passed the Civil Rights Act. He forced that through Congress because when it got stuck, because people still couldn't get the concept of because your skin is not white, because you are not Caucasian, that you are somehow lesser than. He changed that. He made sure that Medicare and Medicaid became law in this country. Medicare was created to cover older Americans, those 65 and up, and regardless of income. Medicaid, meanwhile, was designed to help people with low incomes, including families, people with disabilities, and the elderly, the poor. Together, these two programs became the backbone of American healthcare for tens of millions of people. But over the decades, this is going to be hard for you to believe, I know, the system got more complicated. Medicare split into parts A, B, C, D, sometimes Y. Medicaid eligibility started to vary from state to state, and as medical costs skyrocketed, so did the gaps, especially for those in the middle, people who weren't wealthy but didn't quite qualify for help. It's those cracks that people like Peter David fall through, because when you're chronically ill, the paperwork, the renewals, the income test, it all becomes a second job. One missed form, one policy change, and suddenly your coverage disappears. And if you're someone on fixed incomes, there's often no backup plan. The story of Peter David is more than just a tragic footnote in comic book history. It's a mirror held up to a system that too often fails the very people it was built to protect. This was a man who gave his life to storytelling, someone whose imagination entertained millions. And let me just say here, for the companies that he worked for, the publishing companies, DC Comics, Marvel Comics, he made them millions. Where were they when he needed them? Where was the recognition of all the work that he did, the characters that he created, the storylines that he enhanced. Where was Marvel? Where was DC when Peter David needed them the most? Because for companies that tell stories of superheroes, people who show up at the last minute to save the day, they apparently don't read their own books. Because when he needed the system to work for him, it didn't. The truth is, aging in America means living with a kind of vigilance. You have to keep your paperwork straight, your premiums paid, your coverage current, even when you're sick, when you're tired, and when you're overwhelmed. And that is not how it should be. The goal of programs like Medicare and Medicaid was to provide security, a promise that age or illness would not mean financial ruin. But somewhere along the way, bureaucracy, politics overtook humanity. Politicians who have their health care guaranteed to them for life make decisions that take away health care for everyone else. To their credit, Peter David's fans and friends, they tried to fill that gap through crowdfunding, through love, but no one in America should have to rely on GoFundMe for basic care. As we get older, and if you're my age or close to it, you know our needs change. Our energy changes. But our dignity, that stays constant. We are reminded through the stories of people like Peter David that even heroes have fragile sides. And maybe that's the lesson here, that our greatest strength as a society isn't in how powerful we are, but in how we care for those who cannot fight anymore. If you want to learn more about Peter David's work, pick up issues of The Incredible Hulk. You can get a graphic novel that puts them together called Future Imperfect, or Spider-Man 2099. Read his Star Trek New Frontier novels. Remember Peter David, not for how he died, but for how he imagined. And if you or someone you love is dealing with Medicare or Medicaid challenges, reach out. Ask for help. There are advocacy groups, legal aid services, and senior resource centers that can make a real difference. I've mentioned it before. Every state in America has area agencies on aging in them. They're federally funded. No matter where you live in a state, if you're rural, urban, there is an area agency on aging that can help you get through the problems, whether it's food insecurity, housing, understanding Medicare, understanding Medicaid, long-term care, congregate meals. They're there for you if you need them. Because growing older shouldn't mean fighting alone. I'll end on this note, my friends. It came out this week that the Social Security COLA, the cost of living adjustment, will be 2.8%. The same day that was announced, it was also announced that inflation rose to 3%. And that the cost for Medicare will rise by $25 per month. 2.8%. And we're already losing from a cost of living adjustment. Be vocal. Get a hold of your politicians. Get a hold of your senators, your congressmen, your congresswomen. Let them know you're afraid and mostly you're angry, because this is not what we signed up for. We did what we were supposed to do. Now, God damn it, hold up your end of the bargain. Just to let you know, my friends, this will be the final episode of Bill Monty's Guide for Getting Older for this year. Season 3 will be coming in early January 2026. I hope that you'll be along with us, so go ahead and please, no matter what you're listening on, hit that subscribe or follow button. There are a lot of episodes, over 50 episodes, so if you've just come on board, you have a lot of episodes that can keep you company until we return in January 2026. And if you do miss me, always head on over to Tales from South Florida. I've got stories there about living in and growing up in South Florida. You don't have to be from here to enjoy the stories. I hope that you'll check that out too. Please remember to like. Please remember to comment. And please remember to share. I came across a Facebook page the other day. It's a group of seniors. And I was saddened and touched by the number of people who were writing how lonely they are. Stories like, I'm 72 years old. My family doesn't live close to me. The only thing on this planet that cares for me is my dog. The holidays are coming. I'm so alone. My friends, I mentioned area agencies before. You can reach out to them to also volunteer. Join a telephone reassurance program. Visit a senior center or an adult daycare center. Volunteer your time if you can. And remember to help others. Remember to try not to be judgmental about people who are doing the best they possibly can right now. I know you will. Because if you're listening to this, I hope it means you actually care about people. And you know that together we are trying to find solutions and also to pass on a remembrance that one act of kindness can help so many people. So I ask you again to be safe and please be kind.
If it's warm outside but you're feeling colder, not sure what to do without a friendly shoulder, you're not alone, so start feeling bolder. Welcome to Bill Monty's Guide for Getting Older.